everyone, and welcome. I'm Amy from Inspiring Workplaces and your host for today. As with all content from Inspiring Workplaces, today's webinar will be available on demand in our story section on our website shortly after we finish. So if you enjoy the talk, make sure to share it with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else you think may be interested. If you're joining us live, please do join in the conversation and add your comments or questions in the comments section. But on to today, I'm delighted to introduce Melissa Swisher. Melissa is co-founder and chief revenue officer of Socrates AI and has over 20 years of experience driving revenue for companies such as SuccessFactors, Castlight Health, and ADP. She also has expertise in creating killer results-driven teams with a focus on customer success. Her expertise in HR led to the development of Socrates AI, a conversational virtual assistant, which we will be talking a bit about today. But her ability to see the big picture has guided companies like Kimberly-Clark in delivering Socrates to multiple lines of business. Today, Melissa is going to share how enterprise companies like Kimberly-Clark have used AI automation to consolidate digital employee experience and increase revenue and productivity. So without further ado, welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and glad to be here today. So appreciate the time and excited for the session.
Wonderful. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I'll leave you to it and be back at the end. Bye.
Excellent. Okay. Well, again, really excited to talk to you guys about this today, and appreciate everybody's time. So, we talked a little bit about our intro, and part of the reason why we started Socrates 5.5 years ago was that we've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to be a part of solutions, that software applications that really were always meant to help the end user, and as well as the subject matter experts. I think the challenge that we continue to see, though, was how do we make these killer experiences, right, for our workforce, and enable them and empower them to have these really great type of interactions with the company, almost very akin to the way that we think about it from a consumer experience as well. So we'll talk a little bit about all of those different pieces and components as we think about, where the market is today in terms of, why it's so important to think about digital experience and bringing that together, especially in this ever-changing time. So with that being said, I kind of think it's interesting if I take a look back at this last year, right? It's been a crazy couple of years, and I'm certain, like myself, most of you had never had thought we would have gone through a pandemic or something like that in our lifetimes. And from that point in time, the world of work, as we all know, has changed, probably forever. Quite honestly, the world of school has also changed. It was funny, my kids, um, I live in the southern part of the United States, and we had some impact from Ian, and instead of them canceling school, they did a remote learning day, right? So they're very bummed about that change of that experience, but it's very similar if you think about that from a work experience, right? The idea of remote work or hybrid work, and for a lot of companies and a lot of people, for the first time in their career, they had to have an experience that was very different than anything they might have had before. And as we started to emerge from this cocoon of, isolation and, remote experiences, there's been a number of things that have popped up, right? One of which had been, can we continue to support a hybrid model? Do we really want to make sure that all of our employees go back? What are the pluses and minuses of that experience? And then a whole slew of challenges came into the universe when it comes to what that workforce experience looks like. And I think within the last 12 months, the thing that's been really interesting is, I really follow religiously the HR Executive magazine and some of the things that they produce. And just watching this wave, right, it kind of has gone in these last 12 months to where everybody was talking about, oh no, we're going to lose our employees because we have more choices now. They have more choices now around the Great Resignation. And then just a couple months ago, there was a lot around the fear of their job loss and how do we, make sure that we're solid in terms of the continued performance that we do and what we're doing in order to make things, to keep and maintain our job. And the new thing, and it has some elements of the first two, but if you look at that 12-month cycle, really what everybody is talking about is the Great Recession, right? And the recession, and what are we going to do about this? How are we going to continue to contain cost, right? Do more with less, and how are we going to ride out, which is a very normal cycle in the journey of the universe in every couple of years. So, so with that in mind, I think that's why employee experience has to be front and center. I think it needs to be front and center regardless of this essential curve or tsunami that we go through. And so, to me, it really starts about thinking about, well, what can we do about it? Time moves on, right? We continue to go through, we thrive, we survive, we make decisions, and we have to adapt, right? So what are the things that we know that can be done to support this ever-changing world of work, to support this ever-changing employee, right? We've got a really fascinating time if you think of the overall workforce. There's a very much an aging workforce when we think about it from a lot of folks, especially on the executive level. And, so many of the boomers are retiring, and more the generations coming into the workforce, right? Gen Z. But it is a time where you have four different generations and, quite frankly, very different experiences in terms of how they interact with technology, how they interact at work, expectations. And so it's really hard from an employer point of view to say, how do we do all of those things in order to make all of those employees successful, to make those workforce successful? So, I think it starts with there's kind of these two buckets, right? There's always the element of when we think about cost and how have we made things more complex, right? And then there's obviously the inherent soft costs around ensuring that people have these, they want to stay in an employer. They feel like they're making an impact. They feel like they have the opportunity for career growth and upward mobility. But there's this other notion that is really important, and I think it's time to take a look at some of this, right? Which is that every year, right? I'm certain many of you in the audience today, you go through a process on an annual basis and say, okay, here's what we're looking at as we think about 2023. These are the strategic initiatives that we have going on, right? Or these are the things that we want to focus on. And so if we look at, let's say, a dozen projects, right? Potentially now everybody's saying, okay, we have an overall freeze. So this is relevant in that case too. But let's say that there's these number of projects. So let's say there are 12. There's 3 or 4 that you'll kind of take to the end and say, these are the ones that we want to put forward. But oftentimes, if you think about it, the same things that we're bringing forward tend to be versions of other things we've brought forward in the past, meaning that this is the piece of what's happened from a business point of view in terms of how much money organizations are spending on SaaS, right? Or pick your word choice, right? Software applications, content repositories, case management tools. They're absolutely necessary. But one of the things that we have seen more and more is that companies are thinking about how much duplication do we have across the organization, right? Is marketing using a tool that is the same, has the same type of functionality, for instance, that digital marketing might be using versus customer marketing? Are they have the same, usage, or HR in different pockets, in different parts of the organization, and IT and HR? So there's this overall notion that, you take a company 1,000 employees and above, on average, they nearly have 8 duplicate apps that do the same thing every year. With those choices we make about applications, inevitably, unfortunately, some of those don't work out, right? Nearly 50% of the things we purchase churn year over year. And in addition to that, so many of those applications become shelfware, right? So this creates this overall spend cycle. And so it might be time to flip the switch and say, well, how do we think about maximizing the current solutions we have, right? How do we also then put something together that's going to make it super easy for our workforce to use all these things that we know will have impact to their overall productivity and get them what they need. Because at the end of the day, especially from an HR point of view, we really do want to solve problems for the workforce and we care about our employees. But there's some level of thinking about the spend we have and does anything change, right? Success factors, I have a number of years I had spent there versus Workday or PeopleSoft and all amazingly good applications. But really, are they that different, right? Maybe the buttons look nicer, but maybe they're still not necessarily solving outside those power users the reasons why the people don't use those systems, right? So this is just more a food for thought for the way to think about this. And so when we think about a unified experience, we know that so many of the things that we have are disjointed, right? There's fragmented systems, and inevitably that is it becomes a clunky experience, right? There's limitations based on configurations. There's business rules that are fairly complex. HR, you guys know this better than anyone, which is the permissions around HR are astronomically different than they are for most parts of the organization, right? Think of a company that has a different policy or different time off policy for every different location they have. One of our customers has 798 different time off policies. That's complicated, right? There's multiple systems. And then we've done such a good job of providing our employees information, but there's so much of it. So it almost becomes this issue of there's information overload, right? There's information that is, one, you do a query in a system like a SharePoint or ServiceNow to retrieve articles. All again, very good systems. But what happens? People get thousands of results, right? They can then sort it, sure, by, rating of article and try to figure out what's the most relevant based on what I put in the search. But the reality is then it's up to them to say, okay, which of these is going to answer my question, right? Based on what I am asking, how are we going to find that? And oftentimes what we find about content is it starts to grow over time. The old never comes out. And then documents and content that is loaded into multiple sources and multiple repositories, right? So let's say you have a total rewards benefit. It could be loaded there. It could also be loaded in SharePoint or ServiceNow. And as a result of that, there's got to be a little bit more in terms of the cadence around content governance, right? And so many of the other things, and the last piece of it is really around the manual process, right? Which is applications, again, really great for a power user. But the reality is it's based on that system experience versus user experience. And so even though we do a great job of training, educating employees, I think it's fair if we can admit they don't pay attention until they need to, right? And it's not necessarily intuitive for them to understand it if they forgot about it. But when they have a problem or where they need something addressed, they need it in that moment, and that moment really matters to them. And so how do we think about going from that from to, right? So really thinking about the quality of the information and what we're telling people, right? I always try to talk to people about this idea around policy is great and it's a necessity. But at the end of the day, you would never quote policy if you and I were having a conversation with each other. You would talk in a very conversational tone. And that's how people consume data in their life. Think about what people use. Think about TikTok. Think about, you know, Facebook and how people have snippets of information. They don't read long documentation, right? But how do we make this so it's a quality experience for them? How do we really increase the leverage of all these systems we've invested in for our people? These wellness programs and initiatives that we absolutely know are going to benefit our employees and workforce, and make it so easy that we create this user delight, right? And really that last piece is about thinking about how do we get to them where they are. So in that moment that they need something, wherever they are, whenever they need it, give them that ability to get their answer or do what they might need to do. So, and here's the problem, right? And this is really what it comes down to if we take a look at the data, which was really fascinating for us as we started this thing a while ago to see how this has continued to trend in a very similar direction, almost from 4 to 5 years ago. So this is an example of one of our customers. I can tell you that across the board, regardless of industry, regardless of size, the reason people are creating cases are the same, company to company. Pretty much how it looks, these top 10-ish, there might be a little bit difference. One might have a higher frequency than others. It could also vary by time of year. But the reality is this is the things that people are looking to get help with. And they're repeat issues over and over and over again. And so so one of the things that we see is that 80% of those things are consistent customer to customer. And so what we try to think about is how do we really start to maximize, there's kind of these two parts, right? Because they do absolutely go hand in hand. The experience, right? The user experience is critical, right? Because when somebody is looking for something or they need to do something, again, it goes back to that point in time when they need it, right? Because they're not normally tooling around HR systems if they're not a power user, right? And so how do we get them to understand what they can do, in a way that's really intuitive and user friendly? But at the same time, there absolutely is an inherent cost when we think about the amount of repeat cases that come in. So one of the things that we have looked at from a Socrates point of view is to say, let's really take focus on addressing these top areas of questions, or the top reasons people are creating cases. And what we see from our customers is they nearly see a 50% reduction of those repeat usage, which absolutely has a material ROI within the first 3 months of implementation. And I'll talk a little bit about that more, but the problem essentially hasn't gone away, right? So here's where that market started, right? For those of you guys who followed the market and what somewhat happened when we think about AI 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was a really interesting word. People didn't maybe know the difference between what RPA does versus AI, and that's totally okay. It was an evolving market. It just was like when the internet first came out. My kids are still blown away that I didn't have email when I was in high school, right? So if you think about it, in a similar fashion, technology continues to thrive, it continues to grow, and AI is absolutely on that cycle. And so when it came to thinking about things to help organizations, right? Probably 5, 6 years ago, it was all about AI exploration, right? Should we look at these chatbots that can solve pretty um, narrow challenges we might have, right? And so you saw the emergence of a number of different, what I'd call niche players, right? There's a lot of companies out there. There was a lot of chatbots, right? That what they did was they solved a really narrow, small problem, right? And they've done really well at it. Recruiting is one of those examples, right? There's a ton of really good companies out there from a recruiting point of view who all they do is help from that recruiting process and talent assessment, right? There's a whole other part of the market that kind of said, you know what? We have technology resources. We're going to build this, right? We're going to take some of our IT infrastructure and our resources we have. We have this framework. There's these companies that basically can provide these frameworks of bots for you. And they say, you know what? We're going to build this. Kind of interesting some of the things that have happened as part of that. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those, right? And then it was all about everybody had a bot, right? So every single point application that you have all of a sudden decided, okay, we're going to also put together a bot that's going to be tied to our system level application, right? But really, where we're starting to see the market emerge today, I would say it's really still early innovators, early adopters, people who are really thinking ahead, are starting to think about how do we pull this all together? Because otherwise, it's all about fragmentation still. It's still that Frankenstein-esque experience, right? So, build versus buy. Let's talk a little bit about that, right? Or I'm sorry, let's go back to chatbots. Some were really successful, some fell off the wayside. It was challenging, right? The folks who decided to say build versus buy, absolutely some were successful, but oftentimes they had very little resources to support the employees. Often what happened is internally, what would happen is these guys would be focused on looking at how do we support our end customers, right? So the customers that they work with, and then employees essentially kind of got the last piece of that stick, right? The other thing that people realize with build versus buy is it's super hard to build, right? So when you have to maintain, when you have to update, when you have to, think of all those variations of intent and continue to update as things change, it's a really tough endeavor. um, and so people started to say, should we really think about doing this, right? Or is it too distracting, or are there solutions out there that can help us, right? And that's really where this whole concept of, okay, we each have an individual bot. Workday has a bot, ServiceNow has a bot, ADP has a bot, everybody has a bot. But again, that concept that started to fall short was the same thing that we have today with fragmented applications, right? You have a bot that does these commands that are limited to a set number of commands based on workday, right? The same thing applies in terms of ServiceNow. Let's say you have ServiceNow to support HR, from a knowledge repository, as well as case management. It doesn't talk to ServiceNow IT. They are not connected, right? So then you have this fragmented experience there. And then let's say you have ADP, then you have UKG. You can start to see employees then don't know, and they also don't want to deal with 50 bots, right? So how do we think about pulling that all together? And so kind of taking you back, right? This one's always kind of funny to me, is that, you know, is it time now? And I would say, well, why not? Right? You know, try to think back. For some of you, you might not even know some of these things, but right, the idea of a casingle, right? I couldn't remember, there was these BMG music things that you would fill out and you'd get your CDs or tapes or whatever. And then there was these casingles or a disposable camera and going to Blockbuster on a Friday night or the equivalent. And when fax machines, how many people sent out jokes to each other? I remember my parents had a fax machine and they would send jokes to each other, which is hilarious, right? So if you think about that, the world from a technology point of view has been on fire, which is awesome, right? It's great. But because of that, there's so many things that are super convenient, right? I always say I can't imagine, and hopefully this doesn't sound snobby, but for me, this idea of not, I don't want to have to call a restaurant. I love the fact that I can make reservations online, or I love the fact that I can get an Uber or a Lyft anytime I need it, or if we don't feel like cooking, DoorDash can show up, or when you go out with friends and use Venmo, right? Or cable, or is no longer in existence. So things have changed. Our workforce is experiencing this daily. They're consumed by it. People are on their phones all the time, and they're engaged with these short snippet, convenient, simple types of technologies, right? So it is time to think about, we really need to think, how do we make this experience unified? Because people expect it, right? They want it, they crave it, and they understand it. And if we can meet them where they are by also giving them a compelling way that they can get that the business is able to not only get a hard dollar savings, but also start to promote and maximize the programs and initiatives that absolutely help and support these employees, it's a no-brainer, right? So instead of a world of fragmentation where you have all the questions that continue around the how do I's and where do I's and I need to's, and thinking about how do we solve this disparate problem, right? The market and where we see people going, where we see our customers going, and the conversations we have, enterprises want to have a platform that can pull it all together versus all these different capabilities. Our tech stack was built in a way to support other bots. It's compatible with other bots, right? So it creates this environment, especially from IT, where it actually gives them more control, but it can also pull together so employees have that one experience and where to go. And so, how do you think about starting that, right? And how do we think about that experience, right? Well, first, it starts with the foundation, right? What are we telling our employees today? right? And a lot of that comes back to the content, right? And the policies. And so what we do, which is fairly different, is the first thing we do when we engage with a customer is we'll go ahead and take an inventory of all the places you guys store policies and content data. We'll do a crawl, a one-time crawl, gather all that data together. We create an inventory of your content, and we look at that content by topic, subtopic, language, country, role, and we give you that baseline category. From there, we have an internal tool called a compliance bot that runs tens of thousands of questions against your content, and it'll identify out all the places where contents overlap, right? Because we talked about earlier about how content lives in multiple places, right? It identifies out all those places for you. In addition to that, it also identify out all those places where we have disparate answers, right? So if one of the documents says you get a 20% reimbursement on contact lenses and another one says 50%, well, what's the source of truth, right? So that foundation is really, really important, right? And then we can start to, then we'll clean it up, right? And it really starts to establish a content governance process moving forward. And then it's odd as you guys update information moving forward. One of the things we do is we then have an API that's going to automatically pick up any new content that's processed, so it'll be always current and up to date. So then we can really start to think about the quality and how do we reflect the brand and the culture that all our companies should be super proud of, right? You know, you guys work really, really hard to create these killer experiences and killer um, branding and why you want to work at this particular company. And that really drives that user experience. And so then we start to think about how can we do this from a whole holistic enterprise solution. And then really, it's really important equally to think about those measurements and outcomes. So, you know, Josh Bersin, for those of you guys who know him, you know, a very big thought leader in the HR space, you know, really hit it with the thought around employees are those most valuable assets, right? And you need to make sure that we redesign work to really work in the world we live in today, right? And so there's an opportunity for us to create these experiences by starting that shift, right? That mind shift. So how do we constantly recruit our you know, even if we're not hiring externally, how do we recruit our people every day to retain them, reskill them, and redesign an experience for them that's going to be killer that inherently will benefit us? So our whole thought process around this is, you know, we are a return on experience platform that's powered by AI. We're very different than what I would call a chatbot. And we really optimize to figure out and deliver measurable, quantifiable outcomes, right? Employees can have experiences all day long, right? Employee experience to me is a funny term because employee experience could be a bad employee experience or it could be a great one, right? So, what are we really optimizing for? And so, in our mind, there's a few five kind of key principles that we, you know, that represent what we offer and the solution that we provide for our customers. So one is it has to go everywhere the workforce is, as long as it's supported by the company. The way I interface with technology might be very different than my peer, very different than somebody who works for me, right? So can I access this information through text, right? Can I interface with the organization through text message? Can I interface through collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams and Slack? Or let's say I want chat pop-up windows or WeChat or WhatsApp, as long as it's supported by the organization, it should be everywhere and anywhere. And then employees can choose how they want to interface because it's an experience they're already used to. Instead of employees having to go through this notion of single search results, as we talked about earlier, when you do a query, let's say in SharePoint or ServiceNow, again, great repositories, but this 1,000 results, then deciding and deciphering which one's going to give me my answer. And then is there attachments within that? Am I in an ongoing click battle? We really optimize to give people single answers, right? So if I ask a question, right, to you, I wouldn't say, please see this attachment. The same concept should be conversational in the experience that they have with technology. So we optimize for that. And then you should be able to give the ability for people to do anything that they might need to update or to take action on. right? And it should be done in a way that's very conversational, very simple, and user friendly. That goes not only to the systems, right? Because this is where those bots, those point solution bots, kind of miss the mark essentially. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but it has to be able to go cross platform, right? It has to go outside of the source system itself. Because so many times, not only is it important to support, what the ask is, it has to respect the workflow, it has to respect the different systems. Let's say you have a scheduling tool that lives one place, and then you have time and attendance, for time management that might be somebody somewhere else, and then you have payroll that's in yet a third system. You've got to be able to cross over, and then you need it to be available to them in the moment that matters, 24/7, 365, right? So give them the fun and not give them all the complexity that lives underneath. We talked about success metrics and outcomes, but it's really important to say, okay, what's going to drive those user metrics? And it's all about user experience. How do we think about, can we start to reduce the things that are so high frequency that have an inherent cost? And how can we give time back to people, right? Not only time back to the individual employees, but think about our HR subject matter experts. And so foundationally thinking about the things that impact them, right? Those high frequency things, the things we know happen every year. We know there's a flurry of activity at year end, um, before people do taxes in the States, especially with W-2s or whatever it might be, or open enrollment, benefit time, or any different type of initiative going on for a company. So really focusing on that foundation. Then really shifting the mindset to the quality and the culture and that experience we want to drive, right? What do we want to represent to our employees that's going to not only answer their question but warm their heart, and also, make sure that our culture shines through. Can it also be extensible to beyond just HR and benefits and support the entire enterprise? And throughout the entire time that we work with you, right, it's an ongoing relationship. It's very unique in a sense. It's the only place I've been where this is a journey that happens throughout the life of the partnership, because we continue to tackle the things employees need throughout the life of our work together, and measuring those successes together, and ensuring that we're increasing the user experience and satisfaction. And did we effectively reduce some of those things that are high frequency, low impact, um, low impact to support, but high impact to get done, and then increasing and giving time back, right? So I'm not going to spend time on this technical too much, but just think of this as going to where people work, right? Giving people a personalized experience in a channel that they want. And what Socrates does is it interprets what the user is asking. We support over 133 different languages today. It has an NLP engine where we understand and disambiguate the requests people are asking, right? And then it's going to connect into the relevant places in order to support what the person is asking or wants to do. So it does that by connecting into different API sets, different bots, as well as the knowledge repositories, right? All done to serve back a personalized experience, answer for that end user. And so Socrates, not only while we started this journey on HR and benefits, quickly, one, we support an enterprise-wide solution, but most of our customers continue to grow with us, right? So a number, I would say 50 to 60% of our customers now, we support them from everything from HR to IT, finance, payroll, and legal. So just to do some quick math, and I think we've got about 8 minutes, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the product, and I'll do it really quick, but it's a concept you can get very quickly. I just wanted to give some math to you. So let's say you guys had 7,000 cases or 84,000 cases that come in on an annual basis for HR. We have an average statistic. This is a statistic from JipBit about the average cost per case, which is $15.56 per case. So if you think about that, and 70% of the cases that are coming in are high frequency repeat cases. So if you look at that number, of that 84,000, 70% of that represents 58,000 cases. So how much does that cost, right? You can see here, if we said, okay, let's look at saying, we feel very strongly we have the ability to reduce those cases by 50% by month 3. Think about the cases we could save and then the dollars we can save just by year 1. We try to make this super conservative because it's real and it's powerful. And then this doesn't even tackle all the other things of places that there's inherent benefit and cost. And so that's the reason why that is super compelling. So I'm going to shift here and I'm going to show you a little bit about the product. And so I mentioned to you guys as we started, Socrates goes to wherever the workforce is, as long as it's supported by the company. We mentioned you can interact with the company through text message. You can use collaboration tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams, all the different pieces, or it can just simply be a chat pop-up window that sits on, different application sites, different content repositories. And so if you think about it, I'm going to show you just a couple of quick things to get you familiar with the application. I can interact with the tool just like I would a friend, family member, or colleague, right? And it understands, chit chat. It could also address things that happen in terms of if you think about acronyms, right? Oftentimes when somebody joins a company, there might be 1,000 different acronyms that a company uses, right? And so how do we think about onboarding those people, getting them more familiar with that? But let's say, for instance, I have a question about, um, I want to understand, let's say, how does an FSA work, right? So instead of me getting a number of documents, that's going to take me to that. It's going to give me a very simple, straightforward answer that tells me exactly how this works. And then if I want to learn more, it actually takes me into the system source doc itself and then takes me to directly page 17 of 54 of this document, which describes it in further detail. In addition to that, right, I can also start to think about, okay, well, I don't maybe know where my total reward summary is, right? So maybe I'm asking a question about where is this information, right? And so here you can see what it, oops, of course that has to happen in demo, but view 401k details. Let's see. Oh boy, 2 for 2, 0 for 2. Okay, I'm going to switch. What is my HSA balance? Okay, so here I can see, I'm going to ask this question. And so here you can see in this information, what's done here is that this is instead of me having to go into the source system itself, it's going to pull this information directly from, let's say, where that information might live. So I, as the employee, don't necessarily need to know where to go in order to get that information. If you guys noticed when I started this, there was this menu that came up, and this can be configured by company, right? And it can be configured by role and the things in terms of the time of year that are most relevant. One thing we know that people need all the time is they need the ability to let's say get their most current pay stub. So here you can see instead of me having to go into the source system, it quickly brings it up. Or let's say I might need to update my emergency contact information, right? So instead of me having to go into multiple systems to do that, I can just simply go through in a very conversational manner the ability to get those answers and just answer a few quick questions in order to update this information. So it's going to say, okay, well, who is this person related to you? It's going to validate what I just input, right? And so here I can say, yep, this information is correct. Now it's pushed it back into the source system itself, right? Second piece related to that then is also the ability to get information and also think about doing things as things are needed to be done. So let's say here, I am going to say, you know what? How many vacation days do I have left? Right. I ask my question and it's going to say, okay, here's the amount of time do you have? And by the way, do you want to use any of that time now? This case I do. And let's say I want to go out next week and I will be back on Thursday, right? So it's gone ahead, it understood, it converted the dates, right? And it said, okay, I've requested your approval. So we talked a little bit about how we think about respecting workflow. And so then my manager, you notice here I went into Slack, right? Jane, my manager, gets a notification saying, hey, Melissa's requested this. She has the time available to use. No one's out. Do you want to approve? In this case, she does. And then she can say, yep, all set. And so not only is her approval noted and pushed into the system source itself, but also Melissa then gets a notification saying, hey, Jane's approved her time. From there, she could also have it automatically schedule an out of office, right? So making things really intuitive and easy. Or I know I'm almost out of time here, so I'm going to show one more example. But let's say, for instance, an employee wants to or needs to cover a shift, right? So you can see here what this did is it pulled up this individual's schedule, right? From the scheduling system. And so what shift do I need to go ahead and potentially change? Based on that scheduler, it understands who might be available to cover the shift. And so then it can say, okay, I'm going to notify her, this individual, to say, can you help cover this shift for one of your other employees? So now you'll see, I've actually went ahead and jumped into Microsoft Teams, and then the other employee gets a note asking if they could cover your shift. Are you able to do this and will you do it? Right? In this case, the employee says, yep, I'm good to go, no problem. So she gets a notification. And then what has to happen, it needs to, let's say, from a workflow process, respect that approval. So Jane, back to Jane, she gets a notification saying, hey, these guys want to go ahead and get their shift covered, right? Do you approve? In this case, she does. And so from here, what's going to happen is that both employees will get a notification that the shift had been updated and changed. So from there, you can see the one employee here, and then the other one here. And then, of course, all those systems are updated. The scheduler is updated as well. So the whole concept behind Socrates is to respect permissions. You know, it understands who the user is. It's used in a way to answer questions that people have, whatever it is, anything that they might need to do or update, right, and get things done. So from there, I certainly appreciate your guys' time today. I think we have time for questions, but I got to default it back. And
Yeah.
see where we go from here.
Thanks so much, Melissa, for sharing that. There's loads of food for thought there. And also thanks for showing us the platform a little bit with that demo. It's super interesting to see. We are close on time, but I think we have time for one quick question. I'm always interested to hear about mistakes. And as you were going through your presentation, it made me think you clearly work with a lot of different companies. So I wanted to ask, what do you think is the biggest mistake that you've seen companies make when it comes to digital employee experience? And what's the thing that seems to just come up more often than others?
That's a great question. So I think the biggest thing that is hard for people to do is the biggest mistake, hands down, is they continue to think as subject matter experts versus end users. Because the reason things that totally make sense to a subject matter expert, because they are absolute black belts in their field, doesn't make sense to an end user. So opening your mind to help really support that user experience is really key to have those optimized and optimal experiences.
Makes sense. One other thing as well, you were talking a lot about the kind of savings that you make from just connecting the dots and connecting platforms and kind of creating this one unified experience. Can you share any kind of real tangible results that customers that you've worked with have experienced?
Absolutely. Well, one of our customers, Kimberly-Clark, I think you mentioned it when we started. They've seen over a 50% to 60% reduction in terms of case volume that has come in. In addition to that, they have about 71% repeat usage, which is very high adoption. So not only are people using it, they're coming back and using it again.
That's huge.
So, and we support them in 20 different languages today.
Yeah, amazing stuff. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. If anyone watching wants to get in touch and kind of learn a bit more about Socrates, we can connect you. You can either email at info@inspiring-workplaces.com, or you can use one of the contact forms on our website. We'll be happy to connect you over. But for now, thanks so much, Melissa, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you all. Take care.
So, if you want more great content, don't forget to sign up for the Inspirathon, which is coming up in 2 weeks' time on October 20th. It's our free 24-hour non-stop virtual event with over 65 presentations designed to give you the confidence, tools, and knowledge to make 2023 the year that you create a truly inspiring workplace. It's also the day that the Inspiring Workplaces team don't get any sleep. We do it because we love you. But don't worry, you're not expected to stay up with us. The content will all be made available on demand, so you won't miss a thing. Hope to see you there. But for now, it's bye from me. See you soon.